Birthday.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the January 14th Finance Committee meeting. And for roll call for the committee, I'll call on Vice Chair Anthony Maddox.
Here.
Member Jim Posh.
Here.
And I'm Chair Gail Larson. We were going to entertain a report from Councillor Maddox on the lending institutions that are offered for mortgage and home improvement loans in predominantly African American neighborhoods this evening, but Councillor Maddox has advised me that he would like to reschedule that, which I would happily do. So we're going to move on to the next agenda item, which is an update from Council's independent CPA firm, and I'm not going to try to pronounce it. I will let you pronounce it.
I just called him Junie.
Okay, from Junie.
So I just realized that I can't
Yeah.
spell them correctly on my thing.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Oh.
So I need to ask, do we have an agreement signed by the mayor so we can proceed with having them update us, or?
When I last checked my email, which was, I believe, close to 5 o'clock, I haven't received any notes. And I believe it is in the works. I did talk to Council President Kuda earlier today, who had a meeting with the mayor and the chief administrator today, and I believe that subject was brought up. I have reached out to the mayor myself. The papers were available last week, probably late last week. But the way this works is we pass the legislation, the law department has to sign off, the accounting office here, the acting finance director has to sign off,
Right.
And the mayor has to sign off on any piece of legislation. And the first two items are done, so it's sitting on the mayor's desk. This is a critical item. It's on our list of things that we have that we had discussed that the CPA firm needed to get involved in our review of the budget, just as advising council as council sees fit. So it's an important item to get done. We also know that there's a time crunch with accountants near the end of the year. It was expressly stated we wanted to get this done. We wanted to have them engaged in early January. It is now middle of January. So I'm hoping this is gonna happen any day. I did speak with our contact, Frank Ike from Junie and Panicki. And he's looked at a lot of preliminary information as he's found time, but he's made it very clear that he really needs to have the signed agreement before moving forward. He was scheduled to come visit us tonight. He has looked at the budget materials that we have all received thus far, and hopefully would be able to answer questions at that point and then give us some advice moving forward. One of the things I was gonna put him on, and because he suggested, and keep in mind, I don't feel like I direct Junie, and I think maybe that's a conversation this committee needs to have. I don't think it's right having one person, dominate the communication channel between us and a resource that's available to council. So these are things that are on my list that I wanted to get to him, and I think there's commonality between some of these things and what council wants. But I do think that there needs to be an open channel between this committee, and I'm even okay if someone says, hey, look, all the communication needs to come through this community, which means it comes through you. I mean, I think this is a conversation I think we all need to have and how we wanna work with the communication. I mean, you can't have too many people managing a consulting project, but he's really there and his firm is there as a resource for us. There is an issue, I think, regarding the state 2023 fiscal audit. There needs to be some information, I think, that we get from both outside sources, which is the state auditor and where we're at. And I'm very hopeful that we can be meeting with the mayor and the mayor can give us his update on where we stand with that. Because we don't really have that information, and we know that that is important for some of our council members to either see that finished product or understand where we are in the process of that. But there's ways, I mean, there's relationships that these accounting firms have with the auditors, and Junie and Panicki do these kinds of audits. They know the people that are involved. It's all public information. So I'm hopeful that we can get a report from them on where they see we are in the process.
I have a question for you, but before I go, I have neglected to introduce the counselors who are at the table, Counselor Cobb and Counselor Petrus, and our city administrator, Horgan, is over in the corner because he prefers to sit over there apparently. Welcome to join the table, sir.
Thank you.
How would you feel about the communication that we would do? What's your feeling about
I
that?
had a question about, just for clarification too, have they met with the council leadership at all or okay, so it's just solely been you?
It's only been me.
Because when I left the council meeting, I know you guys came back in the room and had a conversation about the scope of work. Do you know, I guess it would have been you then, I didn't know if there was any further conversation about that or what that would look like or how that would happen, or would they then come into a finance committee meeting or committee of the whole to get that? Because I see what you're saying, that I just didn't realize that council leadership or hadn't had a meeting either.
So, I was hoping that we were gonna iron this out tonight
Okay.
with us. I mean, I think because we're sort of the financial arm of council, so to speak, that we could advise council leadership and advise our peers on where this needs to be. And that was it was on the agenda. They had earmarked time, they had done some preliminary work with the assumption that this agreement was gonna be signed. And I presume it will be signed shortly, at least that's my hopeful thought. I think the minute it's signed, I think we need to reconvene it amongst ourselves. We'll see where we get, how through we get through with the requested information. But I mean, the limits, the way I read it, when we went back and had the continuation of our meeting, there was a series of, 15, 20 items on this list. And I think we need statuses of those. I think I've already had a conversation along with Mr. Cobb in my monthly meeting with the mayor where we went over the list, which I'm happy to go over with everybody, because I think there's some things that there was some additional information, there was some context that I think needs to get shared in that meeting. I think all positive things. But I think I'm jumping around here, I'm sorry about
No,
that.
you're not. This is helpful.
Yeah, but specific regarding the engagement, this is all important stuff. We have something on the calendar, I don't have my calendar in front of me, I don't have my computer open, but it's February, we may want to have another meeting.
Well,
Oh,
that's on, I'm sorry.
no, you're fine.
Counselor, we do have to talk about the next meeting because this is gonna be rapid fire.
Okay.
We'll have to schedule from each one meeting to the next, as long as Addie's in the room, she can help us see where the three of us are at least minimally, and get them on the calendar for this evening, so as we get towards the end, we'll do that.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, my question was along the scope of work and then the list. I didn't want to make sure that I was combining them if I shouldn't be. Is the list at all connected to the scope of work, or is that separate just to get the full budget?
I think it's separate.
Okay. I didn't know if there was anything from there that we needed information-wise to help inform that scope of work. That's why I was wondering from a research standpoint, I didn't know.
So, backtracking to when, I know you weren't able to attend after the restart of the council meeting as a whole, when the list was actually compiled. And I would certainly say if there's things that you think that need to go on this list, we should amend the list because you weren't there. But item 5 is results of the independent CPA's firm's review of the 2024 budget. So I think there is some review of that budget and how it looks in context to the 2025 budget, like how it all carries over. So there's specific items that are, that's the only place where we've actually have the independent CPA firm's review. But when I was talking to the mayor, Chairperson, I may have jumped into agenda item 4 already.
Yeah, I figured they were going to flow right into each other. That's why I was wondering. So
Let me make a point as the chair.
Yeah.
My understanding, as I put together the agenda, was that this list is a compilation of what we put together at our last council meeting, our committee of the whole. And so, it doesn't mean it's the be all and end all, we can always add more.
Mhm.
But to me, it's quite a bit,
Yeah.
it's quite a bit. And so a component of that is the CPA audit, the CPA's involvement. I did wanna ask you, are they looking at the financials that we have available that are posted on the website?
Yes.
Ms. Junie? Okay, cause that's important to me, that they were looking at that as well as the budget. Cause that's actuals,
So, well, actuals as of
September 30th.
September 30th.
Yes.
So, what I did, just to make things a little bit easier for everybody involved, and we were on a time crunch, is at the time we gave them the budget book for this year, although it wasn't available electronically, so I scanned it, including all the individual pages of all the department reports. So there's basically, I think, 4 documents, 4 days worth of budget books, 3 days worth of budget books, the master book that was given out in the day run, and those PowerPoints. So I guess that's a total of 7 documents. And I gave them the 3 financials that we have
Okay.
for this year, and I gave them the financials that we have that have been posted on the website from last year, and I gave them the budget information from last year. I gave them a listing of my questions. There's a series that I've been sharing with everybody, all council members individually. It's just sort of like an update of where we are with the questions. I think from my perspective, you could take that in context, but that's essentially on hold. This is council's list right now, so this is what I'm going.
Thank you. Thank you. So I will make sure, Addie, maybe you can make sure that President Kuda knows that we still need that letter signed by the mayor, please. And I go ahead and move on to the next item, which I'm also concerned about, unless committee had anything else to say about this discussion.
Oh, you know what, just as part of that, I know they have the information, but I was surprised that they're doing anything without that signed contract. How far have they gone? They just reviewing it right now and waiting on the contract, or?
They're waiting on the contract.
Okay, I just didn't want to get into a situation where they were.
Hopefully there's not a situation. I mean, council passed this legislation. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to proceed. But I will tell you, other than sharing the information and maybe 1 or 2 possibly phone calls, and a text string this afternoon basically saying that, I don't think we don't have an agreement yet, so we can't, don't come. That's all the communications I've had with them.
Okay. How would, I guess, how comfortable are they? Because I know once you have a signed contract, in most cases, it's got a pretty specific scope of work already. How comfortable are they with us adding or adjusting to something after the mayor signs the scope of work, or how broad is it within it? Because I'm just really concerned that maybe the scope of work would turn out being different than what they signed, to the point we might have to review something. So I didn't know what they were starting with, or did they give us any guardrails or parameters to say keep any possible conversation into that, or that was my concern. Since we don't have the scope of work and agreement, what's in it instead, and where that would be?
Well, it's for advisory services.
Okay.
So it's a pretty broad scope of work.
Okay.
But it is limited to our financials, just financial work and the budget. There's a I forget off the top of my head the maximum limit, but there's a limit on the contract.
Okay.
So as they're working with us, normally you present, okay, we're this far through the budget. It was sort of like it is a guess, because you really don't know until they see information. It's hard to guess on exactly how much work needs to get done. You, for example, may come up with a question that's going to take some research, which would then be included in that project. I mean, you're part of the finance committee, you're part of the council, you've hired them just as long as we've hired them. There might be some piece of information that's important to you. And I think that's going to evolve over time.
Okay.
Hopefully a short period of time.
That brings to mind the question, Councilor Maddox or I have a question of Junie. We don't want all 3 of us, because that's quorum, on an email thread.
Right.
So how best to make sure that we can get our question to the person that needs to ask it of Junie? I hear you saying you're not comfortable being the only one communicating, but I think we need to have a person as the funnel rather than all three of us or all 7 members of council, because then you just get into,
Yeah, and it gets back in the same situation with like our separate list and they're
Yes.
working from different people.
yes.
Yeah.
So I think if there are a regular presence in our meetings, if one of us I'm okay handling this any way you wanna handle it.
Okay,
But if, for example, Anthony, I'd have no problem with you reaching out to Frank, asking him a question, one-on-one communication. I mean, there's no discussion amongst ourselves. I mean, maybe you're copying. I mean, we need to have Bill Hanna to confirm this, but if we're keeping our discussions and our interactions either electronically or just face to face in this room, but just copying everybody. Again, I wanna make sure that the law director is comfortable with this. Even if one of our other council members has a feeling, I would hope that they would reach out too.
And that was my question, since I know you're both at the table, is what that would look like for you. Would you expect that any information to be funneled through the finance committee that way, or would you wanna reach out directly? I'm just to get a sense of.
Okay, I mean, as of right now, I don't have any particular questions to ask them, and I don't have a strong preference for like how it would work. I think that it would be helpful though if we had some degree of like insight into what's being asked and like what their answers are, because maybe it's the case that, you know, someone asked a question that someone else had, and then they know, oh, I don't have to ask this, and then that would also prevent us from, you know, taking more time than is necessary from the firm. So that sort of insight, whether, you know, we get an update periodically, like every few days, like, okay, these are questions that have been asked, here are answers sent to everyone, or something different. That's the only thing that I am interested in like figuring out. But with regard to who asks it, I'm fine with either asking directly or sending it to someone else. And again, I don't have anything right now in particular that I want to ask them.
I'm wondering if for transparency, we should have, the questions could go to them. Each member of the finance committee could ask that question, and then it's Chuni's here, and they read off the question as asked, and they reveal the answer to the whole committee, plus anybody who's attending and plus the public. Does that seem like it would work, or is that cumbersome?
I would feel a whole lot more comfortable if the communication was to all of us. And with all the transparency that you see going on in this room with the microphone and the cameras, I think and as opposed to being filtered by someone like me. I mean, not that I'd filter it, but you know, I think hearing it from the accountant is a whole lot better than hearing it through somebody else.
Councilwoman.
I mean, would it be okay if we send them an email to copy everyone, and everyone has the understanding that they should not respond, and then the firm could respond, reply all, so that everyone gets the response, but again, we have the understanding that we should not reply all, which would constitute engaging in discussion. Is that sufficient, where everyone would get to see what is being asked and what responses are being given?
What's your sense on that, Eddie?
To me, it sounds like the same what.
Should Addie do it?
Round robin, like we, because technically that we could have a council meeting that way using Addie that way, it's just emailing and then she would,
I think it makes more
it'd be the
sense
same.
to have them come in, like you were saying, honestly.
Yeah, cause it would,
Deliver.
pretty much it would make them the go-between, we're still having the meeting. We're just using them to disseminate the
Okay.
information to keep it out of there, so
So
yeah.
we send our question to Addie and she sends it to Chuni?
Oh, no, I'm saying it would be,
No, you
that
can
it would
send
be,
it to Judy, but
yeah,
just
it would
don't
be
copy.
risky the same way, is we're having this council meeting, Addie's just to go, you know what I mean?
Send it to
We
Judy.
know that whatever we're saying to Addie, she's going to communicate through a reply all to everybody else. The next thing you know, you've got that
Yeah.
going.
And CC Addie? CC Addie?
Sure, but then I at least can keep track of what's,
I
How
would
do
like,
we get the info out to other folks
I think that, like you said, that should
during the meeting?
yeah,
they could
during
share it?
meetings, they should
Okay.
share.
we're gonna have frequent meetings, so I mean, there's just no way around that, so.
Cause that was my next question, is in terms of what they're working on in the scope of work. Do you see that? Is that something, because I heard you say that you wanted to work on that tonight. I know there are council members not here. Is that what we're looking at over the next finance meeting or so out to really nail that down as well? Or is that the plan? Or I know we're doing, because we're working two things, you got some questions and then you got that scope of work there. I didn't know how we would go about that. Are we waiting for the entire council to come together to decide on the scope of work? Or do you feel comfortable with is the council expecting the finance committee to, you get what I'm saying? I don't know how far to go versus with the entire council to start that conversation.
I would anticipate that the finance committee should be on the agenda until
Okay.
that we have a budget confirmed for 2025. So we're on the agenda for committee of the whole.
Mhm.
And for those people that not everybody can get to all these meetings, and it'd be difficult enough to get all three of us in the same room as well. I think council needs to know, the other members that aren't here this evening, that they're fully welcome to come and join in our meetings here. But if there's some commitment that we have, that we will report back to them. If anything's changing, if there's updates, if they have questions they want us to make sure get asked. Then we all have Chuni's email via Addie because she's forwarded that thread to us.
Mhm.
So is it, all seven of us send it directly to Chuni with CC Addie? And then we reveal the answer. I know that our council, the committee of the whole are so full of stuff. And I just, how do we abbreviate it without asking people to watch either this meeting or the committee of the whole
Yeah, because that's what's gonna
to
happen.
share that information?
They'd have to go back and watch those finance committee meetings.
And that's just not fair.
So I think the main touch point is you're gonna see Junie at either, certainly at our meetings.
Okay.
I'm hopeful for,
Okay,
and as needed at the council meeting of a whole.
Okay.
And you know, just like the other committees that I feel work pretty well, the report out to the other council members who can't be in attendance are always there. And if anybody has a question, I don't see why a council person individually can ask that question of Chuni and just make sure that, and maybe Chuni responds directly to that council person, and then that council person talks about it in a meeting, or Chuni mentions it when they're in one of the meetings we're in. I mean, I don't see a lot of difficulty with this.
we're overthinking it perhaps. So is there room on the council of committee of the whole on the 21st to add us as a line item, the finance committee?
I will say yes, only because I know that the intention that Tony has moving forward, at least for the foreseeable future, is to get as much as we can done in the hour and a half, and then if we need to come back after the
Okay.
regular meetings.
Okay, so continue to adjourn, not adjourn.
Not
Recess.
recess and then come back if we need to,
Okay, got it.
so.
All right.
Yep.
All right, so
Is that just for finance? I'm sorry.
No, just generally speaking,
Oh.
just right now because we've got a lot going on,
Okay,
just.
okay.
So will you invite them to the 21st meeting? Let them know if that's our next committee of the whole? And then perhaps we can get, Mayor Saren, would you join us, please? You have enough charge in there to last?
Yeah, probably.
Okay,
We'll risk it.
okay, thanks.
If you sat here, is there a question or something?
Don't even worry about it. I'll sort it out. Thank you, Council.
Welcoming Mayor Saren to the table. A question about the agreement with Chuni, the CPA firm that the council wishes to engage. Are we ready to go with that letter for your signature?
Signed and sent back to the law.
Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
No problem at all.
Okay, now for sure, I wanna move on to the fourth item, which has kind of popped up intermittently. For purposes of making this meeting just simply getting to where we are right now in this moving towards a 12-month budget, I'd like to go through each of these items that are on the checklist. Does everybody have the checklist? And each one I will read off, and I would expect that, Mayor Saren, we can get an update from you. Most of these would come from your desk.
I know Councilman Pasha, he had updates too. Did you want him to go alongside you when you were doing, oh, okay, I thought you said you had some answers and some clear.
I think as we go through each item, if I have a note,
You just toss it in there. Okay, that's perfect.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank
you
you.
know, some of these things, I didn't know if the mayor was gonna be here or not. The mayor can probably tell you as much as I can.
Okay.
So we're looking for a deliverable time frame for the 2024 end of year fund balances, including unencumbered funds.
Yes, so I can provide a little bit of insight into this. I wanted to make sure that I had as exact and accurate data as possible for you. And generally what that means, you know, normally in a typical year, we'll take a look at how we normally do things and make a projection. And that was done last year by the former permanent finance director as he was working with the interim finance director on putting together a bunch of the schedules that were eventually turned over to council. And that indicated an ending general fund balance, for instance, of around $21 million. That does not seem to be accurate now that we've gotten closer to the end. And I think I may have shared with at least some of the council members, I'm not exactly sure who at this point, who have asked, but we're looking more close to around 30 million in unencumbered fund balance at the end of the year, maybe a little higher. But again, like I said, I want to give you exact numbers.
Yes.
And you know, just again, going back to sort of like the internal workings of things, we make projections before the end of the year. And then I know that there was a request for and the receipt of by council a report about transfers on December 31, as was required by the legislation. And in that email that I sent to council, I'll let you guys know that December 31 is not when we close the books on 2024. And so that information may change a little bit, and it has. So we're going to be providing an update to that so that council can see the exact numbers. We've done a sort of a soft close at this point, but we're wrapping things up, and we'll be getting you guys some more detailed information about our ending fund balances pretty soon. I was hoping to have it here for the meeting tonight, but there's a lot of behind the scenes work that has to take place. And so we're working through it right now.
Perhaps by the 21st?
Say what now?
Perhaps by the 21st?
We'll definitely have it by then. I think I might be done with what I need to do around that this evening. And I'll send council members that information once it's complete. It should be done this evening. But like I said, it's approximately 31 million in the general fund. If we're looking at all funds, it's a little bit more stunning. As you know, the GFOA guidance indicates that we should probably have around 17%, 16.7% of expenditures held in reserve in the general fund. Now, if we're looking at expenditures this year of 60 million, it's a little less than 60 as I budgeted, around $58 million. In the general fund, we're looking at, you know, not a lot. We're looking at around $10 million of reserves in the general fund that we would be expected, according to GFOA guidance, to keep. What we're expecting to end 2024 with is a little over 3 times that. And what we're expecting to end 2025 with, under the budget that I've introduced is even more given the surplus that we're looking at. That may change over time. We may, find that we're bringing in more revenue as we did in 2024 than we anticipated. We may find that it's harder to fill vacancies in police than we hope again. And so, various changes like that mean that these are projections and we can't tell the future. But we're looking at probably, ending 2025 with around $32 million in general fund reserve.
We're looking at October, November, December financials in terms of when we will be able to see those. I would expect kind of
It'll
all
be
folds
end of year
together.
stuff will all
Okay.
sort of be the same financial information.
Okay. Mr. Petros?
If I could, that's great to hear that the general fund, we're expecting to have a larger balance. I'm suspecting that unfilled positions is at least partially responsible for that. Do we have a sense for the other causes for the increased balance?
One of the reasons that we did, I believe, we received more revenue than we anticipated, than we budgeted for. So that's one issue right there. The variety of unfilled positions or those periods of time where a position was unfilled before they were replaced, those also have an impact. And we can dig into more. I'd have to take a look once we get the final numbers.
So more revenue, less expenses.
I would like to do that because each of these items probably will have some discussion as we go through the budget preparation or whatever we want to call it. So tonight I just want to get through this long list and find out where they're at, all right? The
Now, we
bank,
can take a look at other funds and I can give you a little bit of a preview about some of our fund balances that we're looking at. I don't know that it's necessarily, there are a couple funds that I did want to at least alert you to, sort of the ending balance at the end of 2024 and our anticipated ending balances at the end of 2025 based on the appropriations ordinance that's currently before you. Two funds in particular that I think are going to be especially important for council's deliberation on the budget. And the first fund that I would want to bring up is Fund 402. We've had a lot of conversation about Fund 402 recently, in part because I didn't put any appropriation in for Fund 402 yet, but we'll on the 21st, I think we'll have some more to talk about there. But right now, as it stands, we ended 2024 and began 2025 with approximately $9.5 million in Fund 402, unencumbered, which of course is our finance capital projects fund. And this is the fund that we would lean on most heavily to fund various capital expenditures that we would expect to engage in 2025. And in addition to the current $4 million of capital funding that we already have in that appropriations ordinance, and then adding to that sort of the $18 or so million of Leopardo. We're looking at a current maybe around $23 million of capital investment that we will be funding in 2025 already under that appropriations ordinance. But if we're talking about the cash we're spending, if you look back historically, you're looking at around $8, $9, maybe $10 million of capital expenditure over recent years. You go back a little further and you're talking about really issuing bonds. You're taking on debt to do some of this stuff so that you can maintain appropriate cash flow. Right now, since we've got such high balances, if we want to avoid interest payments, then paying some of this down using the cash that we have available to us for capital projects. We could spend another, $5 million in capital and, still end the year with, $4.5 million in Fund 402. So we've got room there. We've got a lot of headroom to make more capital investment without bothering the general fund reserve at all, even though we could potentially spend more out of general fund and really not feel it when it comes to the amount of reserve that we would be expected to hold on to.
And there was another fund that you wanted to give us a balance on, or projected balance?
Yeah, and I'm sure that we'll have even more conversation about this.
Yeah,
But,
I once again, Mayor, I want to get through this list.
Yeah,
And we also want to have a moment to talk about the ordinance that you proposed, so
Yep. So I want to talk about sewerage disposal, Fund 602. So we ended the year in 2024 and began 2025 with an unencumbered balance in reserve of $11.3 million in Fund 602. Anything related to sewer, and we've got some potential capital projects that we're looking at right now related to sewer that we might want to fund out of that fund, Fund 602. And looking at our expected budgeted revenues and expected budget expenses for 2025, if you remember, we're looking at a surplus of $4.5 million, a budget surplus of a little less than $4.5 million there, with the expectation at this point, absent any additional funding, and there likely will be, of projects of $15.8 million in unencumbered reserve at the end of 2025. So again, even more so than Fund 402, it's just a little bit more restricted in the types of things that we do with it. We've got a great deal of headroom for capital projects that we'll want to engage in if we can in 2025. Those were sort of the two big ones that I wanted to at least mention now, so that when we get to it later, you aren't surprised or shocked by the big numbers. And then the very last thing is all funds. And looking at the appropriation ordinance that I introduced, there's a little less than $96 million in expenditures that we have currently in that budget, all funds. $95.89 million for the year. And when we look at the unencumbered balance for all funds, our sort of all funds reserve number right now, we're looking at $81, $82, $83 million, which is a phenomenal percentage of our expected expenditures in reserve. It's like almost 100, it's 80%. We have 80% reserves
That's
in all
about
funds.
2-3 more million than you said on December 30th. I'm just looking back at the numbers.
These
It's
numbers shift a little
getting better.
bit.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So there's like I said, we're in good shape.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Pash.
So I just want to highlight, as a council person, you're looking at your screen, you have all this data, you're looking at these preliminary financial reports. I feel that we don't have that information that you're looking at, and we need to have it. We need to see it, and I'm anxious to see it, and I'm looking forward to celebrating, some of these big balances. Also curious to see why they're so big. But the issue here is, we really do need to find a date and time when these things are going to be available to us. And the first item, the all fund balances, by the time of our next meeting, the financial reports for October, November, December. I don't know if you do them monthly, but I do know that you usually do these on a quarterly basis. I mean, is it your intent to have the December 24 financials, or at least a draft version of those financials, available to us on the 21st? I mean, I'm just trying to get a sense of timing, because I'm excited to see this. But you're bringing some new resources into your finance department, just for planning purposes. Is this something that we're gonna see shortly? Is it something?
So as the chair sort of asked this as well, and the expectation is that the numbers that I'm sort of giving you estimates of, or approximate numbers right now, we'll be publishing those. We'll be letting everybody see those. Again, there's still a little bit of work that needs to be done on the back end in order to make sure that the numbers that we're providing are precise.
Hi, sorry, Martha.
Director Phelps, please join us at the table, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
We were just having a conversation about the final sort of unencumbered fund balances from, the cross-fund reports and those sorts of things.
I just said to you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
So as I said, there's a lot of work that goes on in the background, and we want to make sure that we're giving you precise numbers and not, we don't want to put anything, in writing, send you something and say, whoops, we're $2 million off. So here's a revision. We're trying to avoid as much revision as possible. But and I guess I'll be putting that together this evening, probably after this meeting. And then sending you guys the information that you're asking for right now when it comes to sort of the final end of the year numbers, talking about the quarterly financials. I don't know that we would need to do two separate sort of end of year and fourth quarter financials. It's the same thing. And so providing you with sort of the end of year financials will serve the purpose of the our quarterly reporting of the financial state of the city. But when it comes to the documentation in support of the appropriations ordinance that I introduced, that will be published and provided to council starting, I'm guessing this evening, if I can take that data and plug it in tonight and then put that together and sort of complete that first tranche of documents. And then we'll go from there. So I'll send you a link tonight.
Of the, for the end of year financial statements 2024.
No, it would include some end of year information, but this is more for the 2025 budget as opposed to like an actual financial statements for end of year. That's something separate.
We did talk about being able to see end of year financial reports by the 21st of January.
Right.
Is that
I know
correct?
Mr.
Representative
Phillips-
Steve?
It's
That's
in the
good.
plan, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
that's separate from sort of the set of
Yes.
documents that you might find in a budget book, for instance.
Yes, and I want to talk about that when we get to the ordinance itself. So if we could move on in this checklist, please. The most recent bank reconciliation report, can we get that fairly soon or?
Did Donna not send it to you? I thought she said she sent October to someone.
I was gonna say,
How about this? We'll get back. Obviously, you guys haven't seen it. So we'll take a look and make sure that we get bank reconciliations.
I'm also wondering about the results of the state's 2023 financial audit. You know how close they are, Mayor Sarin?
We are close. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not the mayor.
No. Also, unfortunately, in a certain respect, the director is incorrect. And this is why. We are close to providing all of the information that we need in order to sort of be done with our part.
To send to the auditor.
Correct.
However,
Just can't help myself.
the auditor, certainly the contracted auditors have their own work to do. And that will take however long it takes them to do it. And then the Office of the Auditor of State also has some work to do, and that will take as long as they take to do that work as well. So, and we're not in control of those processes. So we can provide the data, information, and documentation, but that actual auditing work takes place outside of our control, and so we don't really have a prediction or a concrete timeline to give you for how long that will take or when that will be finalized.
Okay, we've already discussed the independent CPA firm's review and where we are on that. The results of the Archer salary study.
Yeah, I've got some work to do with the judge. And so we're gonna sit down and have a conversation. This is before something comes to council. But we'll be bringing something to council. My expectation is that what I'll be bringing to council will be introduced to council for your meeting on the 21st.
All right.
As long as we can meet the deadlines.
That deadline's already passed, I was over here.
Yeah, but you know, this is the thing. If it's I mean, the agenda's not out yet.
It's not.
We're
Packets go out Thursday.
yeah.
Just saying.
And so this might be a situation where we don't actually officially introduce it or council can walk it on. But either way, that's up to council to determine, but we can try to get it at least publicly released if I can do the work that I need to do with the judge to submit a couple things, because I don't wanna presume, because he's got an entire organization over there that I think needs to be considered.
At the same time you're looking at the Archer study, would you be working on estimating probable salary increases, or are they included in your Ordinance 11 appropriations?
So as the exactly the same as the appropriations ordinance that was introduced in November, well, I guess technically it was first read in December. That ordinance and the one that I subsequently introduced contemplates a 3% cost of living adjustment
Okay,
as a placeholder,
okay,
not as a concrete, this is the
Certainly.
plan, absolutely. Any other potential salary increases we're not putting in a budget.
okay. Counselor Pedros?
So if this is the item that I'm thinking that it is, I think that this was also related to the 860 renegotiation. And we talked about that you don't want to, share everything that you might know. But I think that it would be helpful to at least receive a total of the salaries, of the compensation of the people covered by that contract. And then we each individually, regardless, whether that's 2 million, 5 million, whatever it might be, and then each of us in our own heads can estimate, what a particular increase might look like to the budget.
Is that a piece of information that's readily achieved?
It may have already been sent to you
Okay,
in the last set of
The union?
spreadsheets that you all got back in December.
okay,
But I'll double check to see, and frankly, it might require that you guys look at those spreadsheets with a particular analytical eye, looking at and filtering through the various positions that are listed in the information that I've already provided. If not, then maybe we can have that conversation, but I caution you. This is not the done thing and there's a reason. The reason, this is not the done thing and there's a reason. The reason is that we take these negotiations very seriously. We respect and value the work that these workers do, but we also recognize that we have to be extremely diligent about how we negotiate in good faith with sort of a firm stance, but also a collaborative approach, so that we can create a relationship that is productive and avoids antagonism. But we also, it's my responsibility to negotiate with the entire organization in mind. To that end, in the same way that they will zealously represent themselves, I have to zealously represent the city. And I think the path that you are contemplating and perhaps suggesting is one that could potentially inhibit that kind of really strict negotiating stance. And that brings to bear a lot of worry.
Just sharing a total of the salaries of the folks who are covered by that contract?
Sharing a total of the salaries that are covered by that contract is not of concern at all.
That's all
However,
that I'm looking for.
having the conversation or deliberation on the potential of what comes next through that
I'm not looking for
negotiation is of concern.
No, I just a number so that each of us can individually contemplate, what that might mean for the city. And I can take a look back at the documents and see if there's some sort of,
If there's a way
demarcation
to
in
look
there,
at that,
and then if not, then I can
now
follow
we
up
can,
with
we
you.
can talk. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Counselor Posh.
So when you control those negotiations, and then whatever the outcome of those negotiations are, you come to council, and we generally ask questions like, how much is it gonna cost the city? Okay, that's a question, and because you're doing the negotiations, and as you're going through these items, there's we're working generally with a finance director or an individual in your finance department or HR that has all the numbers, and the impact of the contract. So what I would ask is just give us some totals. I mean, before you sit down, what that total number is. Can we just get that total number from you?
What total number do
The
you?
total number of what the amount is that this
Currently being paid.
currently being paid by this class of workers.
So let's, all right. I could do that. I could provide that. And maybe I'll just let that lie. And I won't talk about certain other nuanced issues that that maybe we can talk about another time or as we begin negotiations or something like that. But having a list of bargaining unit positions and their budgeted wages is not an issue at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't even, for me, I don't even know I don't need to know the positions, I just need to know the net.
All right, we'll aggregate that and send it over.
Thank you.
The next item reads, a capital budget based on real numbers, not projections. I would like to know what sequence, as we look through ordinance 11 and we start to get the by department expenditures and personnel, the 4 different categories that we saw in the budget book. We saw wish lists that the departments had, and so I'd kind of like to know, will you be going back to your departments and once you've seen these numbers, the unencumbered balances and stuff, going back to your department directors and perhaps adding some more items to that capital budget? And when we might be able to look at that.
Because this is something that's been a sticking point for me. I just want to again clarify for everybody that that wasn't just a list of wish list. It really was separated out of things that we're looking at now and then things later in terms of having that collaboration. But I don't want anyone thinking that list wasn't a pretty comprehensive list of what they were looking for going into the new year and then having that broader conversation. So I'm still concerned about council. I don't know if confused is the right word, but I think we need to have a conversation about what we're asking in terms of this list. I know that they're going back to give us a comprehensive list without working with council to build that out for the future. So my question is, are we asking for just the 2025 capital improvement projects, which I know during the presentations we got information on, or are we looking for something broader at the same time? Because I really would like to know why we want that information and how we're going to utilize it now. Because I really wanted us to have a more collaborative conversation about the capital improvement projects. I'm still dead set against the fact that we just removed ourselves from that conversation about something like this. But now we want the specifics of it. And so I just want to know, I want to know anything. I just want to clarify that we did get those requests and they weren't all just mashed together in a wish list. The presentations were divided out and the acting finance director at the time did state why she was dividing it up that way. I just don't want anyone thinking that everything was piled up on the list and we just received it that way.
I've got some in,
Can I give Counselor Pasha, please?
So, from what I understand, the mayor in our last council meeting of the whole agreed to provide us a capital budget. And when Councilmember Cava and I met with the mayor, there was some ambiguity regarding the term here in this sheet number 8, item number 8, actual numbers, not projections. I mean, when you prepare a capital budget, it's really estimates. And that is sort of the process that the city has used year after year after year. And I think we as a council need to accept the fact that we're gonna get estimates because you don't know what they are.
Right.
But the issue here is there's also an item number 10, and this is all related, clarity regarding capital items of 2025, the status of the 2024 capital projects, and which need to be carried over to 2025, from 24 to 25. So I think this all kind of goes together, and later on there, we're asking for a clean budget book that includes the capital items that were sort of put in last time, but we knew that we were gonna have to add to that. So what I'm looking for, my expectation is we're gonna get a budget book by department. It's gonna include capital items for 2025. It's gonna list the 2024 capital items that we accomplished. It's also gonna include the 2024 capital items that we didn't do that are carrying over to 25. And that is gonna create hopefully a constructive dialogue with the mayor's office and those department heads.
let me clarify one point though on that.
Okay.
There was one point that I don't want to give the wrong impression.
Okay?
When you talk about things that were expected to be completed or funded in 2024, that may then also that weren't completed or were not funded, that appear in a future iteration of the 2025 appropriation ordinance. It will be as a capital appropriation for 2025. It will not reference 2024. It will not be connected to 2024. Some of the things that we expected to fund in 2024, we may not fund in 2025. So when you see something that was in 2024 as a capital expense and then is now in 2025 as a capital expense, that will be your signal that it was something that we carried over. But I don't think that it's useful for us to go through the exercise of sort of creating some sort of separate document of 2024 things that we are then going to do in 2025. I think we can all be grown-ups and look at the 2024 list and look at the 2025 list and see what things carried over.
Just as long as there's a 2024 list available. And I'll use an example, the fire truck. There's an approximate $1 million cost for a fire truck that was budgeted for last year. That did not happen. It was on a wish list for this year. I assume it's no longer going to be on a wish list. I assume your recommendation from your staff, and again, I'm presuming whether it's recommended or not, but I suspect though that it's gonna be on the list as a capital purchase item for 2025. So we'll see it in 2024, we'll look at it in 2025 realizing, okay, well, it's essentially getting carried over to this budget. And for me, that's enough. But there's a whole lot of items
That works.
besides the fire truck.
Yeah.
I think
And anything that does not appear in the 2025 budget that did appear in the 2024 budget is simply not being moved forward and we'll have to wait.
we do have that list of projects that were removed via a journal entry, an ordinance from the 2024 budget and indicated they were gonna be placed on 2025 budget. I've been tracking those, so I think those, hopefully we'll be able to have discussion on that. So would you foresee us doing a capital budget in February?
No, I foresee us doing the capital budget as a part of the appropriations ordinance that
Okay.
I've already proposed.
Okay,
I mean, unless your meaning is that, I guess technically we could both be right. depending on when council chooses to act on it.
Gotcha.
Mr. Petros was.
Sir,
If I could, so just to clarify what I'm hoping to see, so going back to the budget hearings, for some departments, we saw that there were capital items being requested, and in some, there were little or no capital dollars being requested. And at the bottom of some of these departments, the document said 2025 capital requests not in 2025 budget. And so it would be helpful if we did have the administration say, these are the ones that we would ideally like. In the case of the police, we went through that list with the police chief and identified which things we were going to fund. But just knowing for planning, for fire, what ideally the administration would like, then we can decide, okay, maybe it's the case that we want to fund all of those things. Maybe it's the case that, we're going to fund only a portion of them, but knowing what it is that they would ideally like would be helpful for us.
it sounds like that's what the mayor will be including.
Perfect.
So this is my, just so everybody's, up to speed and sort of forewarned or alerted to what comes next. I will be proposing a set of capital expenditures in the 2025 appropriations ordinance. And that is the set of capital expenditures that we will be expecting to fund. Obviously, council has the space to make amendments as it sees fit to the budget. But from the administration's perspective, we will be putting forward a list of the capital expenditures that we are prioritizing for 2025.
Great.
Okay.
And anything else will not have likely, or at least is not guaranteed the administration's support.
Okay. The next item is answers to council's outstanding questions related to the budget. Do you still have some outstanding questions that you have not gotten resolved, or
I think
where are you at?
we can get what we all agreed to on this, well, we didn't all agree to this page, but this is sort of like the collaborative work effort of this.
Yep.
This satisfies my request.
Okay.
It indirectly answers my questions.
Okay, I'm okay with that. Counselor Maddox, okay with that? All right. We've already talked about the capital items, so I'm not gonna skip it, I'm just saying we included it in the previous discussion. A clean budget book it sounds like that's what you're gonna be giving us, Mayor Sarin, that we have the budget by department with comparisons from year to year, which was part of what we got originally, but with your appropriations updated. Yes?
Correct, and I wanna again go back to some of the sort of miscommunication that occurred last month. And I want to just remind everybody that when you see a budget broken down by one of our operating departments, like not one of our accounting departments, but one of our operating departments, Parks and Rec, Public Works, Police as a division. When you see those and you going back to sort of like the personnel costs or the other than personnel costs, if you go through each operating department and you add up all of the personnel costs for each operating department, it will not equal the total costs for personnel in all funds. And that's because there are funds like our general operating things like Fund 701 hospitalization, or I think that's, hospitalization. Those are organization-wide, not specific to a department. But you will see personnel or personal services costs in those other funds that are not specific to a department. So I just want to remind everybody of that moving forward when you take a look at those.
Counselor Posh?
So this actually sort of blends into the next item on the item, which is department totals, including schedules by departments and by funds not specific to a single department. So those in the work, when you totaled all the department stuff and when you looked at the total, there was about a $10 million about a $9 million differential.
Mm-hmm.
The bulk of that was hospitalization. you're using it as sort of a global cross-department thing. We need some justification on what that is. I mean, there was about a $600,000 difference between what was in the budget and what we had estimated last year. And that's a number that really needs to be discussed with everybody. I mean, there's obviously increases in healthcare, but you also had some fewer employees. What does that look like? How is that number calculated? And I'm not sure in previous budgets that number was really looked at. I think it's an important number to look at. I'm one of 7. Hopefully there's a consensus amongst other council members that we need to look at all the items and schedules. So yes, I would share the information departmentally like you have done in the past. And the things that are not part of departments, but they're overall in the budget, it just can't be in a big number. It's gonna need some justification. And if it's all under hospitalization, it's a little bit more than all hospitalization. There's like 3 or 4 funds, I believe, it's part of. Then just let's have a schedule and let's look at it and let's discuss it.
Okay, we can talk about hospitalization, we can talk about estimating hospitalization, we can talk about the, $8 million in Fund 701 or whatever it is. But I do want to, I'm very cautious about sort of holding up a fiscal year budget if you've got different assumptions for what you think hospitalization should be, fine, put together an amendment. You know what I mean? I don't know about holding it up for a deep dive analysis. Like either we're going to get in trouble on hospitalization, which seems unlikely given our history on this, but it's more likely that if we do find ourselves in a strange spot where either hospitalization is substantially more than we anticipated or substantially less than we anticipated, we have the opportunity we have the opportunity at any given point to make adjustments to the budget. And so I don't want to hold things up on okay, should it be 8.1 or 8.15 in hospitalization in Fund X?
Yeah, I'm not suggesting holding anything up. I mean, the numbers that were created, calculated to put into the appropriations budget, and that were calculated to put in the appropriations budget had to come from someplace. There is some schedule out there.
Well, no, generally it's based on previous practice. It's based on we don't do clean sheet budgeting here. That's not, we don't start from zero. That's not how we operate. It's not feasible.
Not suggesting that, not suggesting you change your budget practices, but the issue here is in order to come up with these appropriations, there's some schedule, there's some work, there's some calculation that was done on that, so you can share that with us, okay? And that's it. And it's 4 funds,
Sure.
possibly, maybe 5.
Just a second, Daniel, sorry. I think that when we see that discrepancy and that when those figures won't be the same, then can we raise that question at that point and you can provide a schedule? Does that work for you?
Well, and that's the thing, that what I was trying to point out is that it's not a discrepancy.
Well, difference.
I'm gonna have to
Go
interrupt
ahead.
you. Here's why. Some of the words that we're using, I think, are gonna shift the conversation, the tone or tenor of this. When we say justification, it means we're looking to see if something is right or it's reasonable. I think we should assume both. Clarity or asking for something or to share information, I think, is a much better way to word this. But to ask the administration to justify certain things, it speaks and it adds an entirely different tone to this. And it's part of what I think the public is wondering, if there is something nefarious going on. And so I don't ask questions of this administration and say justify this. I want clarity. I want them to share that information so I can get an informed decision. But to ask them for additional information to see if something is right or reasonable kind of speaks to something a little bit more. And so that word justification, I've heard it now 4 times, is really bothering me in terms of this. I'm assuming that the information that I'm getting is accurate. If I do investigation and I can question it, is one thing. I just want to make sure that the words that we're using are absolutely describing and accurately describing how we want that information or why. But to ask if something is right or reasonable is the only reason that you would ask for someone to justify something. And I don't know if that's the appropriate way to do this. I'm not looking for them to justify these numbers. The numbers are what they are. You know, I spent my career in banking, and I've never been in a finance meeting and asked anyone to justify anything. It's just let's show proof. Let's share this information. Give me some clarity. Add color to this information. It is much different than asking someone to justify some information. It kind of speaks as if they have to kind of prove that something is true. And I don't want our administration coming to the table that way.
Anything else? We gotta pull it together.
It doesn't have to be justification, it just needs to track back to the number. I'm not making any kind of accusation, and if it came across that I am assuming that the numbers are wrong, or I don't believe the numbers, that's not what it is all, that's not what it's about. It's about understanding what we're voting on. And I wanna know, for example, if our healthcare costs went up 10, 20, 15%. That's all I would like to know, okay? I can't control that amount, and I don't think it's anybody's fault it went up so high. It's certainly no one's fault in this city. But having that information is important, especially if one of us is voting on it. So that's all I'm trying to say.
I'm going to move on. This next one also has a word in it that I know we've struggled with. The information regarding the deficit the city has been running per year over the past year over the past 3 years, let's say. Is that a question from you, Councillor Pash, or anybody else in this room who can explain that a little bit better?
I'm not sure where this came out of.
Right.
But all my note next to this is need end of year 2024 financials.
Yeah.
That's really all I need to know. I mean, a deficit is a deficit. You can look at it as an investment. You can look at it a bunch of different ways. But if a deficit, you're basically spending more money than you're bringing in. But there's reasons for that, and sometimes it's perfectly fine. I just want to know, what I wanted to know is really what is the 2024 financials, and we've already covered that.
Yeah. You good?
I do want to clarify something. I ran a couple reports maybe last week or so, thinking about this concept, and just for clarity for people, maybe I went back to 2021. I don't think I kept that particular spreadsheet because it didn't really have any immediate use, but did at least want to mention that in taking a look at our actual revenues and our actual spends, we mostly don't run deficits, just generally throughout the last few years. Now I will say that when it comes to things like ARPA funding, we realized those revenues in 1 year, and we made, we were expending those revenues in a different year. And that's deficit spending. We're not, we ran a surplus, because we got the revenues in and we didn't spend them. And then, a couple of years later, we spent some money that we didn't realize that year in revenues. And so for that fund, for 241, we're in deficit spending. And it comes down to sort of the bulk of that ARPA funding. Last year, the revenue that we brought in, if we're talking about including things like ARPA, then we're definitely in deficit spending because, we spent a bunch of ARPA money that we didn't realize as revenue last year. It's the same in some other funds, and I'll put it to you this way. We spent years, and I mean, we've been talking about this for years, but we spent years building a reserve back up. We passed an income tax increase in 2015. We began realizing additional revenue because of the budgetary issues that preceded that tax increase. And for years, we built our reserve. And then there comes a point where, now we're staring down the barrel, as it were, of a $30 million reserve in the general fund, which is approximately 50% reserve for our general fund. Now, that's shocking. And maybe that's fine, but we also have needs. We also, and some of those needs I'm trying to mitigate in different ways. I'm trying to meet those needs in different ways that don't hit our budget in the same way. So the Leopardo deal was a good example of that. We're going to realize a bunch of capital improvement in the city without having to spend the cash. It's a finance deal in a certain respect. It's a performance contract, an energy saving performance contract. So that allows us to achieve some of those needs without hitting the budget. But again, we're not doing our jobs if we have needs that we could be funding, but instead we're sitting on a large bank account. And so that's where I think I took a bit of not offense exactly, but it seemed inappropriate to use the term deficit spending because of how it's understood at the federal level. And instead, what it really is reserve spending. We, have built up a great deal of savings. And if we don't use the money that we are extracting from private residents, businesses, we don't use that for the common good, and instead we sit on it, then we're not doing our jobs as a public entity. And so any amount of that money that we ever spend in the future, since we realize that revenue in years past, will be deficit spending by definition. But it doesn't, it has the wrong connotation, and it does not actually communicate the correct set of facts to the people who hear it. And so that was the real reason why I had trouble with the deficit spending terminology. And we can have a conversation about sort of what our philosophy is on how we deal with a reserve. I mean, if we wound up, at the end of 2026 with, again, still, let's say $103 million of expenses and a reserve, or if we keep it to the general fund, let's say we're looking at $65 million in general fund expenses in 2026, but somehow we achieve a reserve of, $62 million, we would probably want to spend some of that money, right? We don't really need 100% general fund reserve if we still have needs out there, right? I mean, that's sort of a philosophical question that we can have. And it may or may not impact the 2025 budget discussion. Of course, in this case, the budget that I've proposed in the general fund, it does not anticipate a deficit.
I would like to say too that Director Schuster would tell us that so much of that money that came in is interest from ARPA money. So as we spend them down, we're not going to see that same amount of income. And I do feel that as we get the capital budget established for 2025, we're all going to be wanting to look at what needs to be done in 26 and 27, and we can all work together on that. So I'd like to ask the next question, which is there some information that could be given to us to clarify the 50 or so unfilled positions that we have had, and if there were savings in 2024, I expect one would want to know, is it reasonable to ask how much of that is saved because we didn't have the labor to pay? Is that too hard to extrapolate?
I could turn some of that over to you. I think the basic answer is that anytime you don't fill a position, you are, for that period of time that you're not filling it, you are saving a certain amount of money. So for instance, if we lose somebody in forestry, a climber goes to a different company or they choose a new career or something like that, for the time it takes to replace that climber, we've achieved some savings, potentially. However, what we might also find is that when we replace that person, we've found somebody with a higher level of skill or experience, and we hire them at a a different set of, maybe they have got a certification that the previous person didn't, and so we're paying them a little bit differently under the contract or something like that.
Is that
So-
too tricky a number to get to?
Well, it's difficult probably functionally and could be time consuming if we are looking at sort of all of those periods of time within any given year
Yeah.
where a position is vacant. So if a position is vacant for a month and a half, we would have to go and take a look at every position where there was any turnover, any vacancy throughout the year, and calculate some portion of salary and benefits that might otherwise have been expended if that person had stayed. If they're then replaced, we would have to do a calculation about the potential additional salary figure or benefits that person would accrue in order to offset the savings that we calculated for the vacancy. I mean, we can, in a rough way, we can take a look at what we budgeted for positions and then take a look at what we expended for positions
There you go.
and provide that, and that would be a little bit easier, but it
It'd be a lot easier.
Yeah, well, let's
it
do
would
works
be a
for
lot
me.
easier. It would be a whole lot easier.
We could do
That's
that
how
the
we
next
do it.
month or so or whatever. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's how we knew it was at 1,400,000 with the police.
With the police, right.
Yep.
I just want to clarify, because I know you just asked for the next month or so. For expediency, what our expectations are, because I do want to get a full year's budget passed, and I don't want to keep pushing this out while we're.
I was trying to also give them grace.
So I guess my question with our list is, as we're checking off things and clearing them out, I want a sensor to take attention to how comfortable we are moving towards approving that budget, or if some of these things, and I know it's gonna take the majority of council, because I don't have any of these questions, to say, you know what, I can wait on this and I'm comfortable. I would like to see if we're moving any closer to approving these, because some of this stuff is gonna be a little bit further out than I think it needs to in terms of being able to get a full year's budget passed. And so as we're doing this, I would like to know, after these questions are asked, maybe it would be appropriate to figure out what is still outstanding that is preventing the full 12-month budget from getting passed. And if there isn't anything on this list at this point, I would like to see how to move forward. But if we're setting things out over a couple of weeks, my concern is that getting that budget passed is also going to be set out. So I would like to know if we're setting some things out, are they still necessary for the budget being passed, or kind of what we're looking at here? I just want to know where we are as we're setting things out.
And that's very fair. And I think that's what my concern is. I want, the first 5 items are ones that I was particularly interested in, so I can move forward in my own brain towards a 2025 budget. And maybe we can have that discussion about after we've, in the committee of the whole, for a few minutes to see where the rest of council's at, and ask them to, we know we're gonna get a lot of information forthcoming from the administration very soon that will answer a lot of our questions. So if we can just iron that out and everybody's comfortable with it, I'm happy with that as well.
Yeah,
Is that
just as long
okay?
as I get a sense of what
Yeah.
folks are still saying I need for this versus that information, I think will be helpful.
And that's prioritization, right? And if we just get what we need, we can move on with it. This next item is the same way. We've talked about other known expenses for 2025 not in the budget. Increased salary, grant matches, confirmed COLA was included in the budget presented. We've really talked over that one, so I'm not even gonna dwell on that. So, yes,
If I could, so I think that I mentioned the grant match because we were
Okay.
talking about the US Department of Transportation grant, the 800,000 and our need to match that with 200,000. So if there are any other expenses that we
Okay.
anticipate, just to make sure that they're in there. I don't know what else, maybe it's the case that there aren't any others other than the grants, but I just remember that was one that I happened to ask about that wasn't in there.
it
And
would be our expenditure for 2025.
right, anything else that we expect to incur during that year, if it's not in there, include it.
Keep in mind, I know you probably know that those grants, many of them are gonna drop out. So they wouldn't know a lot of that information until halfway through, or even if something's covered in many cases for grants that were written prior. So I don't know how much information you get this early in the stage considering that. I don't know, the administration may see that different, but I do know, just based on the experience I have, that with grants, you can plan, but you really can't, you can't see that far out in many cases as the funds are coming in, the way just that they're dispersed. So I don't know if this is important in terms of the budget for you, which is why I was concerned about the level of information you could get.
I think that you're asking that we make sure all the expenditures are included that we need, and the mayor's working on that, so I think we'll be okay, and there's that $200,000 that we should see in the expenditure, right? Because there's that, the federal grant that we have to match. Counselor Posh?
So there's two items. One of them was the Shaker Lakes project, which it looks as if it's gonna be a 2026 expense.
Yeah, we won't have any actual expense until 2026. I don't know exactly how Shaker is working through this. I know that there was some discussion about them putting some aside in one year and then some aside in the next year. I don't know if they've come off of that. I know that there's been at least some discussion about them moving away from that, because if we're not going to expend dollars, and we know we're not going to expend dollars in 2025, sort of artificially inflating the 2025 budget in the absence of any, contractual obligation to spend the money doesn't seem like an appropriate way to budget.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on
Okay.
that. But it seemed to me there's gonna be some time where your finance department is, we know the city has to pay that $2 million. I'm pulling $2 million out of thin air, thereabouts. Thank you. But it should be earmarked somehow, this is more of a question in how Cleveland Heights finance works, okay? It doesn't matter what Shaker does, I'm more concerned about the practices of this government. Would you earmark that? Does it make sense to earmark it? Do you put it on a footnote knowing we don't have this, we don't need to include it in the 2025 budget, but we know it's gonna have to be in the 2026 budget. So and this is a question that doesn't necessarily have to be answered. I'm certainly not looking at, I wouldn't want to hold up any budget over this kind of thing, but it would seem to me that there should be some level of funding, putting in a fund or earmarking something or put it on a schedule, just so everybody knows that it's out there someplace. Maybe it just goes in the budget book as an asterisk someplace. Maybe it's as simple as that. I just don't want it to be ignored, and I want council to be remembering when we're funding a 2025 budget, we have an obligation for next year. We may not want to dig too deep into our resources, our fund balance without taking that into consideration. The other issue is an economic development fund and how we fund economic development. And again, this is more of a practice. It may be something that's better addressed by this finance committee and the finance department later on this year. But what's a healthy balance to have an economic development fund? I believe we know without really talking about some real estate projects, but we've caught wind in executive sessions that there's some out there that might require some funding. Do we start? How much gets seated in some of these economic development funds? Where is that? Is it a healthy balance? Is it what we need in those accounts now, knowing we're gonna be spending the money? What I don't wanna find is we're paying a budget and then 30 days later, we're adding $1 million or $2 million to something when we already knew that we'd be spending that money someplace. I'd much rather see that in the budget now.
So I think one of the difficulties in a city like Cleveland Heights is that we don't have a strong history of really robust economic development practice. What I mean by that, certainly in recent memory, maybe in years gone by, things were a little bit different. But in recent memory, we've been, let's say for the last generation, 20, 24 years, the recession in 2001, followed up by the mortgage foreclosure crisis and attendant recessions there in 2008 and following. and of course COVID and all of this fun stuff that we've had to deal with over the last 24, 25 years. There are some organizations, some municipalities, some jurisdictions, the county is an example of this, where they've got resources that they more frequently use to provide things like economic development loans, or you know, with certain stipulations for loan forgiveness on certain things, certain deals. Deals are usually one of a kind because they have to address the needs of that particular business venture. Cleveland Heights has not participated in a great deal of that. What we have primarily done is work with developers on various ways to finance things. Sometimes, in rare occasions, we'll do a loan like we did for a grocery outlet over in Cedar Fairmount. But that's few and far between that we do those sorts of things. And we don't necessarily have a good model to predict how many of those kinds of expenditures will come up. Most of the time, we're helping businesses achieve tax benefits, TIF financing for things, or assisting with other levels of government to provide tax credits, like our affordable housing tax credit or historic tax credits that the state provides. So most of the time, we are not providing direct economic development benefit to a deal. We're not putting money in most normally. And so we don't really have a good expectation, and I wouldn't presume to predict, I think, without sort of having a steady practice. And it could just be a decision. This is how much we're budgeting for potential economic development loans. We put it in a particular fund, and we hold it there. If we don't use it, we don't use it. And it ultimately just sits there unencumbered until we do. And we can just set money aside and do that. I suppose that's a way we could do it. We could arbitrarily pick a figure as well, without any particular expectation that any deal will come through the door that we can close on. I don't know that taking money, so for instance, out of the general fund and placing it in what I think it's 411, maybe economic development. It's I think Fund 411. Putting it in Fund 411 to have it sit there without an anticipated project or without an anticipated deal is useful. It might be, just so that we have a figure there and we know that we're not, unless some fantastic opportunity comes across, and we'd have to come back to council anyway and make a transfer, or we could just do it out of the general fund. It's interesting though, because I believe 411 is technically a capital fund.
Is it 402 is a capital fund? 402
is a capital, that's finance capital
Yeah.
projects. But I feel like as originally created, 411 might have been a capital fund too. In any case, that's probably unnecessary detail, but if we wanted to build out a program of working capital loans, or if we wanted to build out a program of startup, some sort of startup, funding opportunity, we could do that, and then we could, maybe put money aside, take it out of the general fund or something, put money aside in order to fund that program and keep it in a particular fund, possibly with the expectation that loan proceeds would go back into that fund. We could create a revolving loan fund or something. We can do that, and maybe that's a discussion that we can have in the context of the 2025 budget, but that might be a larger discussion than 2025. But I don't think that it's an inappropriate discussion to have. I think it's a worthwhile discussion to have.
Good. I just have two final items. I just want to know when we can get them, written schedule of how the projected 2025 revenues were derived, again, a schedule of what went into the 2025 revenues, and then whether in our union contracts there are guaranteed employment levels.
So
I guess that's a yes or no.
as to the last question, no.
Easy, we
Um,
got one done.
Well, I mean, and again, like I said, negotiations are complicated.
Yeah.
And we don't, like, I wish I controlled these negotiations. That would make things at least simpler. I don't know if it would be easier. But, this is a back and forth process. This is, it's a real negotiation. It's a real bargain that we're striking together. And we also don't always control, even the parties don't necessarily have a complete control of the process because of how it can move to a fact finding, go to arbitration or something. And some of those things sort of get pulled out of our hands in certain ways. So we can't know what the end result of a negotiation is gonna be because sometimes it's not, one side wins, the other side loses. Sometimes it's taken out of our hands sort of entirely. And we are given something that we then have to choose to sort of ratify or not on both sides. So right now, we have no guaranteed employment levels
Okay.
in any of our contracts.
Okay.
In terms of the second to last item, and this is something maybe I have a difficult time with, can somebody describe what they envision in terms of a schedule for projected revenues?
Whose question was it?
I think it might have been a bunch of people's questions.
Oh, okay.
Are a bunch of people in the room tonight? Anybody in the room? In my accounting background, it means you see a list of the components that built up to make that figure at the bottom.
Okay,
That's what my idea of a revenue
so like
schedule is.
thinking about property tax, for instance.
Yeah, and the personal income tax, that sort of thing.
Right, and what we usually do is get estimates from RETA, the county, because they are the ones who are actually collecting. We can take a look at our historical collections and sort of, stress test against that to see if it makes some kind of sense based on the history, based on sort of a general idea of what the trends are. The fact that more people are potentially not going downtown to work and instead are, paying taxes exclusively in the city they live, for a variety of reasons, is one thing. We're not relying a lot on that. But the property tax in particular, I know was a concern for people. And on the 30th, I did provide a little bit of an explanation, but tell me if this is enough information for a particular thing so I can have a sort of an example, a more concrete example in my head about what you mean by that. So we've got a list of properties in our city. All of the properties in our city are assigned a value by the county. The county then, assesses a set of taxation on those things. In June, we authorized the tax budget, which shows exactly how much, in terms of the rate, we're going to receive from those properties at their valuation. So that's a formula, and the county provides us with estimates for what they anticipate. In this circumstance, and I think maybe the previous interim finance director mentioned that in what she submitted to council, that, we got these figures from the Regional Income Tax Authority, their estimates. We got the estimates from the county, who does the valuation and the collection for property taxes. And so our estimate for property taxes also include, and this is something that she didn't include, but I did in terms of my explanation, that the TIF proceeds are counted in that is the type of revenue that they are for the top of the hill. And so when we receive TIF proceeds, and we've actually budgeted for less than we'll probably receive for the top of the hill TIF. But those TIF proceeds are also included in our collection of property tax. And in 2024, I think it was around 1.8 million,
It's closer to 1.9.
1.9 million.
Sharon? in my mind, you've already provided this information.
Yeah.
Because it talks about all the different entities or places we get revenue from and it was as it was in the 2024 adopted budget compared to 2025 budgeted revenues. So I'm happy with this.
Well, and that's basically, but I know that there was some concern about the and this is a function of how we have done sort of the explanation of the budget over the years. When you're looking at that particular that particular table, you see like property tax, and then you've got 2024 budgeted revenue, 2025 budgeted revenue, and that doesn't tell the whole story. And so people looked at that number and they saw a 40% jump or thereabouts and said, wait a minute, why should we rely on a 40% jump just because of the valuation increase? And that wasn't the whole piece of the story. And that's why I think, despite, everything surrounding it, that question, I think, is an appropriate question to ask.
Okay.
And it's an appropriate question to seek clarification about.
Okay.
So in this case, it is a little bit more nuanced in that we got $1.9 million of TIF
Okay.
revenue, which took our estimate and made it wrong. We estimated $10 million of property tax revenue, and we exceeded 12.
So will that
In
graph change
2024.
then? Will it be, you reach that, updating that graph then?
So it depends. We try to look at our amended budgets, or sometimes people do adopted budgets. I think that that's too incomplete a story. But if we're comparing budgets, comparing the budget from 2024 as we amended it throughout the year to what we're budgeting for 2025 appears to be, to me, the most apples to apples. But we can also have a conversation where those things need more clarification and where something like property tax, for instance, seems like, if you're looking at 2024 budgeted, we didn't increase we didn't amend our budget, our revenue budget. I suppose we could have.
Good.
And maybe that's something that we can look to do, especially as we get to that more robust sort of BVA kind of ongoing analysis. We can maybe talk about amending up or down revenue as we start to see trends over a given year. I don't know that we're there capacity-wise yet, but we're working on that.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
And that will probably help with the comparison for a next year budget when we're looking at an amended set of revenues as opposed to just set it and forget it at the end of the year. Because if we get more money in, there was no, or at least I'll say historically, they did not see sufficient benefit to the organization to amend the revenues in the budget. Because we were getting the money in, who cares what the budget says?
Okay. I think that works for all of us, that we can have that discussion as it evolves.
Yeah.
The last item tonight was ordinance it's 11/2025, and we've really been talking about that as we've gone through this evening, so I don't feel any need to revisit that. Councilor Pedras.
Thank you. Whenever you reached out sharing the request for a special meeting on the 30th, I replied asking if we could get a written overview of that. During the special meeting, I watched it. I saw that you explained the hospitalization and you shared that you would send more information to council. And during, I think it was the last committee of the whole meeting, you said, well, maybe we could have a one-on-one conversation. Maybe I could create a video. I just wanted to reiterate the importance of that because obviously I can compare that exhibit to the exhibit of the legislation that was voted down and say, okay, this is the difference. But understanding the context for those changes, I think, is important. So, if you want to do it over a video or some other way, I still think that that's important, and I hope that we'll get that.
You call that a summary report, right, of the expenditures that changed?
I mean,
Between-
like an overview explaining,
Yeah.
in a sentence or two, this is the change that we're making, which represents a $400,000 decrease or whatever it might be, just so that we understand why it is that these numbers are changing. The mayor explained the hospitalization, that was very helpful. I would not have been able to understand that if he had not provided that context to us. So context for the other changes as well will be helpful.
Acceptable, Mayor?
Sure.
Thank you. We'll bring that up as we wait for it to be presented to council. I would also like to talk with my committee members about the next meeting for finance. So we know we're gonna be meeting
I've kept
often.
mine wide open, Patty
Thank you.
knows, we have to work around it, cause I know we gotta meet ASAP, so I can work around anyone's schedule.
I was wondering about Thursday, the 23rd.
I definitely don't have anything on Thursday night, if it's at night, if
At
not,
6
oh, that's fine.
during the day.
Evening?
Yes, 6,
I can do that.
if this is a good starting time for you both. Eddie, would you send out a doodle poll so I know to the mayor and to Director Felts as well? Inviting,
I just realized,
Not a June
invite.
is this one of those we need the council letter, are we trying to solidify anything? I just realized, I know we're available, but I didn't know what we were discussing, if this is something we needed to,
Well, we have our meeting on the 21st, 2 nights before, so
that's true, okay,
I think that will be okay if there's something we have to act on as committee members.
let me just see if they're available. Okay,
Does that work?
yeah, fine with me.
All right. I'm looking around the table, nobody's
So-
in. Oh, Council
so-
Black.
So I guess the expectation is if we're meeting on the 23rd.
At
We
6,
get that, we're supposed to get
invite, yep.
a lot of information on the 21st.
Yep.
And hopefully we'll be able to react to that. And discuss it, and hopefully other council members can join in and
Get that nailed out, yeah.
Yeah, basically that would be our agenda,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
one item.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll put your presentation up until 2026.
Right, at the rate we're
No,
going.
no, no. It'll be sooner than that, Anthony, Counselor Maddox. All right, I'm going to call this meeting, I'm gonna adjourn it at 7:47. Thank you so much.